The great Athenian lawgiver Solon was willing to cancel the debts that had effectively enslaved poor Athenians to rich Athenians, but he was unwilling to redistribute property. That is, to redistribute land in a way that would make land allocation equal. Solon was willing to live with differences in wealth. That is, that he believed that he could institute a system of justice, a constitution that would be just, that would not follow a principle of distributive justice that demanded complete equality of distribution. Solon was willing to protect some of the property rights of wealthy Athenians. Now this raises a perennial question of justice. What justifies property rights? We've talked about rights as certain kinds of privileges or claims or powers or immunities, and property rights are a particular kind of right claim. A property right is a bundle of rights that allow an individual, that protect an individual's exclusive right to use, enjoy, and to transfer something. And Solon was unwilling to transfer, to redistribute the ownership by state force of the land of the wealthy. Why would this be? It asks us to wonder, what is the foundation of property rights? And it's a permanent question of human justice. And there are different ways to answer the question, what justifies property rights? And so let's quickly, just to get our conversation started, look at some of the different ways that property rights have been justified before turning to the unique defense of property rights that Aristotle offers. First, some of the earliest explorations of property rights say that property is justified by occupation. That is, that there was some state and time in which land, above all, was unoccupied, and individual settlers went and occupied it and laid a claim to their title to the land. In fact, this isn't a very satisfying explanation of property rights, but it nevertheless is one that has existed in many different societies. Two, a different justification of property rights, one that does carry some weight, is the idea of free exchange. And so, if you look at an individual, in particular in our society, and ask how they accumulated their property, the answer would be, at least to a certain distance back in time, that their property had been acquired through a series of voluntary exchanges. So think about, for instance, Kevin Durant. He's enormously wealthy. He makes $16, $17 million a year from his basketball contract alone, and then some enormous amount from Nike and his illustrious film career and other methods. So why is it just that Kevin Durant has this enormous amount of property, you might ask? What justifies it? What are the grounds for his enormous wealth? Well, one way of answering this is to say it's based on a series of voluntary exchanges. That is, Kevin Durant didn't come to your house and steal your money. He didn't come to your house even and make you buy tickets to the Thunder games. In fact, people every day voluntarily pay to go see Thunder games, to buy his Nike tennis shoes, to watch his movies. There's no coercion anywhere in the system. Now, this does a tremendous amount of work. It's a very powerful way of arguing about property rights, that it's based on a series of voluntary exchanges. There are some problems in this theory, too, that we can talk about at a later lesson. A third justification for property rights, one that's very important in the modern world, is what can be called the labor theory of property. And it's easy to associate this theory with the great English philosopher John Locke. The labor theory of property says, well, what is property except nature mixed with labor? That is, your property is what you have created. Your property is yours because you earned it. And think of the moral work that that word earn does in our language. You deserve your property because you turned it into your property, that you mixed it with your labor. And if you dig deeper into this conception of property rights, in fact, it's based on an idea that's been called possessive individualism. And Locke outlines this idea by saying that you own yourself. That is, in a primary state, you own yourself, you own your labor, and therefore you must own the products of your labor. It's a powerful theory, but it too has its limitations. A fourth justification of property rights we might consider a utilitarian consideration. Utilitarianism, similar to consequentialism, says that that state of rules or affairs is just, which results in the greatest good. And so whatever arrangement of property results in the greatest good, which can be measured in different ways, is inherently just. And so let me give you an example of how this justification works. We use it every day in the way that our society thinks about patent rights, especially, say, to pharmaceuticals. We give drug companies that develop pharmaceuticals a certain kind of property right in the production of new drugs. Why do we do this? It's not because we feel that pharmaceutical companies are inherently moral or worthy. It's simply because we want to create a system whose incentives produce the greatest good. And so in fact, we usually set a time horizon on drug patents. So there's a certain number of years that they can have an exclusive right to produce a certain kind of drug. Well, why is that? Because we ultimately want drugs to be cheap and available on a broad scale. But we know that if we don't let drug companies make big amounts of money, and you can argue whether or not they're getting enough or too much money, nevertheless, they won't have the right incentives to invest in research and development. And so the way that we think about these patents is fundamentally utilitarian. We say, we're not in this to protect the natural or exclusive property rights of drug companies. We want a society that optimizes, that creates the greatest system for all. And so this kind of property right is grounded in a utilitarian justification. Now, those are the ways that we tend to think about property rights. And in fact, when we begin to justify differences in wealth, we'll often turn to ideas of free exchange, to labor theories of property, or to utilitarian justifications, that is, incentives that produce the greatest results. But Aristotle thinks of property in a very fundamentally different way.